WC championship. That's the Ohio Valley Conference.
And it's been a long.
Back then,
yeah.
The Ohio Valley Conference was considered to be one of the toughest conferences in the country, and we placed more players in professional basketball than any other conference in the country. So we weren't a fly-by-night conference. We had 4 Tennessee schools, Austin Peay, Middle Tennessee, Tennessee Tech, and East Tennessee. And we had 4 Kentucky schools, Western Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, Murray State, and Morehead State. So we had a great conference.
And let's not forget that Western Kentucky, just 3 years after you made the NCAAs and the Sweet 16, were able to make the Final Four themselves, the Hilltoppers. It's kind of the upward climb they've made as an athletic program. That's a big step that they have made even, today, now that they have a FBS football program and so forth. We're talking to the legendary Harley Skeeter Swift, one of the first stars of certainly the D1 era of ETSU basketball. But let me go back to that NCAA tournament game against Florida State. Now, Florida State wasn't the revered athletic program it is today. Bobby Bowden was not yet even the coach at West Virginia, let alone Florida State back in those days. It was basically a few years off being a women's college, I've so heard. But they did have a pretty good player by the name of Dave Cowens, and they were coached with Hugh Durham, who many people will know from his days not only at Florida State but also Georgia and Jacksonville. Going into that game, just what was the feel? What was the game plan to try to beat Florida State?
Well, we had a good center. I mean, he was, God rest his soul, he could contain Cowens. Cowens was an outside shooter as well as an inside player, and he was a go-getter. He really played extremely well. We just had the right camaraderie amongst us. We played a 1-3-1 half-court zone press. Of course, back then they said Hugh Durham had 20 different defenses. Well, we had 1-3-1 defense and a man-to-man defense, and we just startled them. We surprised them, and they had Dave Cowens, and that basically was the only big-name player that they had. So outside that, we could control them. Again, we had 9 players in double figures, so we could score as well as play defense.
We're talking to Harley Skeeter Swift, 1-3-1. How ironic, because that's been the defense that ETSU this year has used in so many of their games to come back from deficits on and really take away big men. We're talking about Harley Skeeter Swift. Again, if you're not familiar with ETSU basketball history, he was the star of the very first NCAA tournament team. And you had, now at the Southern Conference, you got to win the tournament to make it. But back then, correct me if I'm wrong, every school had to win their conference tournament to make the NCAAs. There were only 23 teams. You had to win your conference tournament, and that's one of the reasons why I think South Carolina left the ACC. It wasn't until 75 that you could finish second in your conference and make the tournament, if I'm correct. But Florida State was an independent, and so a lot of schools in those days, Marquette, for instance, DePaul, but were independents, and they made the NCAAs. Tell us, going into the OVC, what was the environment there? What was the feeling on the team before you went into the tournament?
Well, let's take Western Kentucky. That year in 1968, they had their first 5 starters all were drafted in the NBA.
Wow.
Eastern Kentucky had 2. Morehead had 3. Murray State had 2. And that's the best of my recollection. So we had parity in our conference, and if you didn't win at home, you were in trouble. You couldn't lose on the road. You couldn't lose at home, and you had to break even on the road. So we had to play Murray State in a playoff game to see which one of us would go on to the NCAA because we were tied for first place.
That's right, yeah. So tell us about that game. Obviously you won, but take us to the story for someone like me. It's been 50 years, but enliven us with a new ETSU game from their history.
Well, we played Murray at our place first, and we beat them. I don't know how many. It was a pretty close ball game, but it was heated, and we were told when we got to Murray we wouldn't want to come back, and they were telling the truth. They beat us by 36. So we didn't lose our confidence because we could play. So when we got in the playoff game at Eastern Kentucky, we just started out in the man-to-man defense, and once again we used some of the 1-3-1. We had a great athlete at the point of the 1-3-1 by the name of Worley Ward. He was 6'6" and had a long arm span. So we had it pretty well controlled as far as what we were going to do in that ball game, and we came down to the end and we won. I don't know. I mean, it was pretty close.
Well, we're talking to Harley Skeeter Swift again. Now, he was a player who actually played pro basketball after that 68 team. By the way, the next year, ETSU, although they didn't return to the tournament, they actually defeated Duke, which was ranked number 9 in the country at the time, in Duke. So it was kind of an early glory era of ETSU basketball that Harley Skeeter Swift played on. But you were drafted by the Milwaukee Bucks, but you didn't play for them. You wound up with the ABA. Tell us your path from ETSU to the professional ranks.
Well, I was drafted number 2 by the New Orleans Buccaneers in the ABA, the American Basketball Association, number 3 of the Milwaukee Bucks in the National Basketball Association. And Lou Alcindor, now Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, was drafted number 1.
Wow.
I just felt like the contract that I was afforded and the fact that I could come right in and play, I just wanted to start with a fairly new league. It was only 2 or 3 years old at the time.
Now, I know you wound up with the ill-fated Pittsburgh Condors, which is like calling a team, I don't know, the Arizona Volunteers or something. I mean, you know, you're naming this after a California native bird. They'd previously been the Pipers, but Point Park College, and they wanted to call them Pioneers, but Point Park College, which goes by the Pioneers, was going to sue them, so they went over with Condors. Such were the cases of the ABA. But where I'm going with this, you mentioned Lou Alcindor and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Were you on the Pittsburgh Condors team that heavily promoted a preseason game against the Bucks that Lou Alcindor was supposed to play in? A lot of publicity about that, and then he didn't play in the game, and after that, the Condors franchise was basically doomed. Were you part of the Condors at that time?
Oh, yes. I was so excited because to play against Milwaukee. But Oscar Robertson, the Big O, played on Milwaukee, and I had a lot of tea and vinegar in my system, and I came down the court, and I went behind my back and spun on him, and I scored. And I was all excited. I scored on the Big O. Well, he took me down to the baseline and put that well-known jump shot right in my face and patted me on the tail and said, "Slow down, son, or it's going to be a long night." So I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Robinson." So that's how that went.
Oh, my goodness.
Away, I think, 5,000 tickets to the ball game, and it still wasn't filled. We did a lot of different things. We had good ball clubs at Pittsburgh. I had Mike Lewis at Duke, a guy named Joe Kennedy from Duke, Bob Berger from Duke. We had Goose Liggins that came over from the Kentucky Colonels. We had the ball club. We just didn't put it together. We didn't play together. So consequently, it wasn't promoted. The sport wasn't promoted in Pittsburgh. You had the Pirates that won the World Series, the Penguins that played extremely well. So, you know, it just wasn't there. When they had the Pipers, they had Connie Hawkins. They just couldn't make it there in Pittsburgh. It wasn't a good place.
And it eventually did fold, I believe, after the 72 season. And you became